Welcome to another edition of the Giants Top 100 Players. I'm Bob Pappas. The Giants celebrate 100 years of New York Giants football, and one of the really cool things is the countdown in the top 100. And we're going to look at 31 through 40, joined by Paul Schwartz, who is part of the process. And Paul, of over the 5,000 men to have worn a Giants uniform since 1925, we got a list of 100. Talk about that process and what it was like for you revisiting these names and really not just to study in Giants history, but NFL history.
Well, I would like to say it was impossible, but we did come up with a list of 100, so it was not impossible, it was possible. But it's very difficult. I mean, we have two obviously great former Giants here, two of many that we had to look from. And first you had to figure out, are they deserving of the top 100? And then where do you put them in the top 100? Very difficult, obviously two very deserving guys here. But it was great. I mean, you learn a lot. You learn a lot from other voters and just pouring through history and seeing, there's a lot of really good players you had to sort through, really.
Well, we have number 31 on our list, Chris Snee, and Joe Morris was number 38. And Joe, I'll defer to you as the veteran of the group here. You wind up not only setting the Giants' single-season rushing record, but when you left the Giants, you were the Giants' all-time leading rusher. Your reaction to being named one of the top 100 players in the history of the franchise?
When you told me, I almost wanted to cry. I was that moved. I'm very proud of this honor. I'm thankful for it. I had great teammates. I played with some of the greats, and I'm in awe of this whole experience.
Here we go. 1 yard needed for a touchdown. Handoff, Morris, he's going to get it.
To look at some of your numbers in '85, which was the start of that, or the precipice of a championship, and then to see '86 and the numbers you put up. People have to remember that when Joe played, the Giants ran the ball more than they threw the ball, right? That just doesn't happen now. So the number one running back then was more important. He really was. If you couldn't run the ball, you couldn't win. 21 touchdowns in '85, 14 in '86, all those yards in the playoffs. I mean, that's how you get to be in the top 100, because you not only do it, you do it in the biggest stage at the biggest moments. I mean, you can't write the history of the '86 Super Bowl winning Giants without, a pretty good chapter on the running game led by Joe and the offensive line and everything else. But it was a running game back then, more so than it is now, and he was the ringleader of it.
Joe was part of the Super Bowl 21-25 era, that great time in Giants history, 84 through 1990. Chris, you under Tom Coughlin sort of replicated what Parcells did, having won Super Bowls in 07 and 11. For you, what's it like to be recognized as one of the top 100 players in the history of the franchise, and like Joe being Super Bowl champion?
Well, like Joe said, extremely humbling. Actually, when you spoke to me, I had chills throughout my whole body. And it was a similar phone call to when Mr. Merrick called and said I would go into the Ring of Honor. And then to put it in perspective, to think about when you said 5,000 players that have worn the uniform, and to be ranked where I was, it's extremely flattering. And my thought after you told me was going to my teammates who I played with, and how nothing would have happened without the four guys I played with up front. And the offensive line we had was a running offensive line, who could pass block with the help of a good running game. So we had tremendous running backs, starting from when I first came here in '04 with Tiki, and then the heads that came after, Brandon, Derek Ward, Ahmad Bradshaw, tough, physical, downhill guys, obviously different styles, but still physical running backs. So it was something that we took tremendous pride in doing, is running the ball when they knew we were going to run it.
With Chris and his offensive line, the first one in 2007, you were the highest drafted player on that line. There was no first-round picks on that line. O'Hara was undrafted. Richie Seubert was undrafted. Kareem McKenzie was a third-round pick of the Jets, right? And David Deal was a fifth-round pick. So it was interesting. You were the most decorated. I remember the night that you were drafted. Somebody else was drafted that day, right? Who else was drafted that same day? Oh, Eli, right? Eli was drafted, and then he gets traded to the Giants, and holy cow. And before you know it, the Giants are on the clock with the second-round pick. And I remember just hearing, okay, they got Chris Snee, guard, Boston College. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Just a guard, right? Now he's in the top 100, and you and Eli. And, oh, by the way, you mentioned Tiki being a good running back. He had his 3 best years of his career 4, 5, and 6, when you guys, and you blocking for him especially, he had career high to finish off his career. So, I mean, you know. And then 4 years later, you did it with David Boss, right? He was the center, and you had Booth. So still no first round pick. So in your sort of quiet, understated way, you were the top guy for both lines, you know, both of those Super Bowl lines, because you were the highest drafted guy, and that's the way you did it. You did it in your own way, but you were the leader of that group, I can tell you that.
Chris, I want to ask you about number 32 on the list, Osi Umenyiora, your teammate. What made Osi such a difference maker in your opinion?
He was just so athletic. You know, when I first got here as a rookie, you're looking through the defensive lineman. Obviously, Strahan is the guy, and you're like, you know, how do I fare up against him? But quickly in practice, you can just see, I had never seen an athlete like Osi before on the edge.
Dilfer back to throw, sacked by Umenyiora, ball is loose, picked up by Osi, he's running with it, he's got roadblocks to midfield, no one's going to catch Umenyiora, he's got speed, 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown Osi Umenyiora, he gets the hat trick, the sack, the forced fumble, and the touchdown, 75 yards.
You know, elite first step, really good with his hands, and he had surprising power. That was the one thing I don't think he got credit for, is he could hold up against the run. He could convert, you know, a speed rush into a power rush and knock a guy back. So that part of his game was understated. And I just think what I loved about Osi so much was that he just was always in a good mood. He was always, you know, like that infectious smile, that guy you want in the locker room. That it just kind of rubbed off on everyone else in the right way. You know, he was a leader of the team. He came to work, and obviously when he was in uniform, he was very, very productive. Just the guy you want to be around, like an infectious personality, and a guy that just had a passion for football and loved wearing the Giants uniform.
I think Osi also took a lot of pride in recording sacks and forced fumbles without actually ever hitting the ground. Because he was so fast coming off the edge, knocked that ball. It didn't even get dirty.
I think his teammates used to say that he didn't even need to wash his uniform. You know, clean, looked like he wasn't doing anything. You look at this thing, he's got 1.5 sacks, he's got a forced fumble. I mean, was anyone quicker off the line? I mean,
not that I can remember. We saw what Osi had to bring, and yeah, he was, like I said, very.
And he liked, in practice, he liked, you know, he beat you. He told you he beat you.
He definitely did. He did. But he did it with a smile on his face. You know, not a face that you wanted to
But
punch.
you weren't smiling when he said that, I'm sure, right?
Well, he didn't really slide inside. You know.
Oh, of course not, yeah.
Number 37 on the list, this list, Odell Beckham Jr. The talent and the precision and his ability to control a football game from the wide receiver position was pretty amazing.
One of the plays I think about every time I think about football, the day he made that one-handed catch in the end zone. That was a play that you just don't see made.
Deep ball down the right sideline. It's a jump ball. Odell Beckham Jr. made the catch with one hand for the touchdown. Wow, what a catch by the rookie.
Wow, ridiculous.
He did it with one hand. He brought the ball down with control. That impressed me. That play showed what he was capable of doing. And that's Giant football there. You make plays when you have a chance.
Manning takes the snap. Deep ball down the right sideline. He's got Odell on the run across the 40. He's to the 30, 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown Giants, 75 yards, and they have their first lead of the day.
Remember the one game, the Ravens, good team, and they decided to play cover zero, and Eli throws in the slant, and it was just...
it was over.
It was over. Yeah.
It was over.
Now it comes down to 4th and 1. Takes the snap, back to throw. Zips it over the middle, caught by Odell. He's racing across midfield. He's to the 40. Breaks left to the 30. He's to the 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown Giants, 66 yards. Oh, baby, is he good.
Game breaker.
It looked like a video game because there was a guy here, a guy here, a guy here, and you saw Odell, and I said, okay.
One of the guys was Ed Reed, by the way, who's in the Hall of Fame.
He's going to get him, not close. He's going to get him, not close. You know, and look, that was a lot of the offense back then, right? It was, you know, hope, bang. You know, hope Odell makes a play. He made it very often.
Another guy that kind of felt, well, a guy that really fell in between your two eras, but was a great player, is number 34 on the list, Jesse Armstead. But I always got the sense, and maybe you could share this with us a little bit, that Jesse would have fit in the mindset and temperament of your teams as well as your teams.
Mm-hmm. Jesse would have fit right in. He is just Same motor, same abilities, and same just going after people as Harry Carson. Those are people. When I put you in a cast with Harry Carson, you have to be someone special. And trust me, Jesse had that. And he knew it. He was nasty. He went out and took, and he made people pay when he was playing. That's what he wanted to do. And, nicest guy in the world, fun guy, but he did his job every Sunday.
And I think the first time I met Jesse, I was in the weight room, and I was a guy that took pride in being strong, and so Neil O'Hara and I think Luke Pettigrew had like 405, and we're kind of just throwing some reps in, and Jesse comes walking in, didn't even warm up, and he hops on the bench, and he just, and I'm thinking, and I was like, who is this guy? And then I kind of got then I was like, oh, I know Jesse Armstead, and I got the backstory, but I think to this day, probably a guy that you don't want to get in a fight with, that kind of mentality.
Paul, Benny Friedman is number 36 on this list, two-time All-American quarterback at Michigan. This is how good a player he was in his era. Giants owner Tim Mara bought a fledgling Detroit franchise because Friedman was playing for Detroit, and he bought the team just to make sure that he had Benny Friedman as his quarterback for the Giants.
It's a business, right? And the business was getting a quarterback who could sell tickets. And he was a great player, obviously. You don't see a lot of footage of him, but when you researched him, you said there's got to be a place for him in the top 100 because he was a seminal quarterback at an era of Giants football.
Yeah, and one year he led the league in rushing and passing touchdowns. It was a different game at that point in time, but he was a player that helped change the game in the sense of the forward pass was not as common, and Benny Friedman is one of the two players in the league that perfected the forward pass. George Halas said Benny Friedman was the first quarterback to help us all understand in the game the potential of what the forward pass could bring to the game. Now for you two guys, let's keep it on the ground, keep it simple.
Exactly.
There's so many other great names on this list. Fran Tarkington, someone that we kind of grew up watching. Although his notoriety, a lot of it came with the Minnesota Vikings, what he did with the Giants, going to a bunch of Pro Bowls, and in 1970, they had a chance to make the playoffs, but the guy was a magician on the field. Do you remember watching him as a kid at all?
Yeah, I did remember seeing him play, and I remember more from Minnesota. But when I got here, that's when I found out about it, because I'm someone that likes to know about the franchise I'm with. I want to find out this. And that was one of the good things about that, because to see him do that here as well as in Minnesota when I watched him as a kid.
How about Rosie Greer and what he was able to do?
Rosie Greer was an amazing man. He had an amazing life. He was friends with RFK, wasn't he? He was a film star. He was a great player with the Giants. I just, really don't remember him as a player. Watching him was a little before my time, but I've seen clips. Then he went to the Rams, and he was part of, what were they, the Fearsome Foursome, and just an incredible personality. And I think that was the way he was a football player too. He seemed like very gregarious on the field.
I think it kind of speaks to the panel that was assembled in the fact that Rosie Greer winds up finishing 35th on this list, because sometimes we become so recent biased. You think of Alex Webster, 39th on this list, who was as versatile a back as they had.
This time, the versatile Mr. Gifford blocks. Alex Webster carries the pigskin for the touchdown, and the Giants take the lead 7-0.
King at right half back and flank wide to the right goes Webster. Here's Connolly faked the King, throwing down the middle. Rhoda's in the open. He's got it, but he's shakes this one man, shakes this another. He's been chased from behind and brought down on. There's a fumble on the play, and it's picked up by New York, and racing is Webster with the ball from the 20-yard line into the end zone. That's what happened. There's no money.
We're talking about my former broadcast partner, and he was with Jim Gordon and did those interviews, and then his last game actually that he did before he retired and then passed away was Super Bowl 42. But let's get into the nitty-gritty. In 1963, he led the NFL with 251 interception return yardage. He twice led the league in interceptions. He finished his Giants career with 35 interceptions. So we kind of think of Dick Lynch as the broadcaster, the character, but he played on all of those great Giants teams in the early 60s and was a heck of a player that put up some numbers that still stand today.
He's so big too. You know, I remember, you know, when you talk about all different eras, well, he was smaller, this. I mean, how big was he? He was as a defensive back.
He was very tall.
Very tall. I mean, you say, that was a guy who played so many years ago. They're usually supposed to be smaller. And the voting was not about, you know, it's not a broadcaster's wing. This is the top 100 players. So he was voted in as a player. I mean, the other stuff was great, but he was voted in just as a player. And as you said, he deserved it as a player. I mean, the other stuff is icing on the cake, and it's a great legacy of the man. But his voting in was not because, well, he was a great player and then he was a really popular announcer. No, great player. That's why he got in.
Yeah, I mean, he had 7 touchdowns in his career, which is pretty good for a defensive player, which is kind of like in one of the earlier shows that we did. You know, Tom Landry's name is on this list. He didn't make it for being a coach. He was a great defensive player for the New York Giants. So, once a Giant, always a Giant. It's a Wellington Mara phrase. Joe, I want to ask you about Mr. Mara and the presence that you felt with him being so supportive of the team, but never getting in the way.
The funny thing for me with Mr. Mara was this right here. First thing he said to me, he says, "You know why I like you so much, young man? You're respectful. You understand, you came from a good family. I've met your mother, I've met your dad. They're wonderful people. You should reflect that every time you go out in the field because you're a New York Giant." And you know, it made me feel good about myself because he believed in me. And that meant something to me as a player.
Chris, the once a Giant, always a Giant means a lot. When you hear that phrase and know it's a Mr. Mara phrase, what is your first recollection or your first feeling that you get? Both of you have these Ring of Honor jackets on, pretty special stuff, but to know that forever, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you'll always be considered family.
I mean, we're sitting here today, and it actually couldn't hold more true as I just started my job over here with the Giants. So my second job. So it's for them to bring me back and give me another opportunity and another field of the game that I want to pursue. You know, it's not like we had been disconnected for 10 years either. I'm always back for games and appearances. You know, but once a Giant, always a Giant carries forward to the community as well, and just kind of the connection with the fans that will always be there. You know, they're thirsty for eras like we had, and I think it's just around the corner.
All right, so you got your Ring of Honor jackets on. You both have rings as Super Bowl champions. Now to be considered one of the top 100 greatest players in the history of this storied franchise. Does it make you emotional a little bit?
After I spoke to you the first time, I cried. I told everybody in my family, same thing. I said, you know what? I am one of the greatest Giants ever played. I'm proud of that.
Thank you for sharing that. Chris?
Well, I told you I got chills when you called me, and my whole family has celebrated it, and I think, you know, I'm going to touch on this, just where my number sits, because it's a number that's special with the Coughlin family, is number 31, which I'm sure you guys who have been associated with the J Fund knows that was Jay McGill's number. So, and that's the number that, you know, we see now, and my wife swears to this day, she sees the number 31, she thinks of Judy. So, you know, for me to be number 31 and with the J Fund, and then obviously my late mother-in-law, that's a special number in my family.
Thank you both. Congratulations on the honor. Well deserved, and so happy to have you here to talk about it. Paul, thank you for taking part in this and helping understand the history of the New York Giants. For Paul Schwartz, Chris Snee, Joe Morris, and our entire crew, I'm Bob Papa. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Giants' Top 100 Players